Alright, comedy aficionados, strap yourselves in. This is Mind-Blowing Connections, and today we're embarking on an epic journey through the golden age of sketch comedy. We're talking pre-SNL, when variety shows were king and laughter echoed through living rooms across America. So, grab your remote, set your dial to hilarious, and let's dive into this tangled web of talent that shaped the face of comedy as we know it. Let's kick things off way back in 1948 with The Ed Sullivan Show. Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute, that's not a sketch comedy show. And you'd be right, sort of. While Ed was known for introducing America to everyone from Elvis to the Beatles, his show also featured comedians and the occasional sketch. This variety format set the stage for what was to come. But let's talk about a show that really got the ball rolling, your show of shows, 1950-1954. This wasn't just any show, folks. This was comedy boot camp, and the drill sergeants were none other than Sid Caesar and Imogene Coca. But here's where it gets really interesting. You know who was writing for this show? Oh, just a few nobodies like Mel Brooks, Neil Simon, and Carl Reiner. No big deal, right? Wrong. These guys went on to shape the face of American comedy for decades to come. Now, let's fast forward a bit to The Steve Allen Show, 1956-1961. Steve Allen wasn't just a host, he was a comedy innovator. This guy invented the man-on-the-street interview, for crying out loud. But here's the kicker, his show was like a comedy incubator. You know who got their start there? Don Knotts, that's who. The same Don Knotts who would go on to make us howl as Barney Fife on The Andy Griffith Show. But wait, we can't talk about the roots of sketch comedy without mentioning the Marx Brothers. These guys were doing sketch comedy before television even existed. Groucho, Harpo, Chico, and Zeppo started in vaudeville, transitioned to Broadway, and then conquered Hollywood. And get this, their rapid-fire wit and physical comedy would go on to influence, well, pretty much every comedian who came after them. Now, let's give a big round of applause for Red Skelton. This guy was like the Energizer Bunny of comedy, he just kept going and going. The Red Skelton Show ran from 1951 to 1971, and this wasn't just any old show. Red created a whole cast of characters that became American icons. You had Clem Kadiddlehopper, Freddie the Freeloader, and who could forget Sheriff Deadeye. Red's influence on character-based sketch comedy can't be overstated. But comedy wasn't just about laughs. Sometimes, it had a message. Enter, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, 1967-1969. Tom and Dick Smothers used their platform to blend comedy with social commentary, often pushing the boundaries of what was acceptable on TV. And guess who wrote for them? A young Steve Martin. That's right, the same Steve Martin who would go on to be a comedy legend in his own right. Now, hold on to your go-go boots, because in 1968, Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In exploded onto the scene. This show was like comedy on steroids, fast-paced, irreverent, and politically charged. It launched the careers of Goldie Hawn, Lily Tomlin, and Ruth Buzzi. But here's the mind-blowing part. One of the writers on this show was a guy named Lorne Michaels. Yeah, that Lorne Michaels, the same guy who would go on to create a little show called Saturday Night Live. Talk about connections. Alright, now we're getting to the heavy hitters. The Carol Burnett Show hit the airwaves in 1967 and ran for 11 glorious years. This wasn't just a show, it was a comedy institution. Carol Burnett, Harvey Korman, Vicki Lawrence, Lyle Waggoner, and later, Tim Conway, this was like the Avengers of sketch comedy. But, let's break it down a bit. Carol Burnett didn't just appear out of thin air. She cut her teeth on The Gary Moore Show in the late 50s and early 60s. And who else was on that show? Don Knotts. We've come full circle, people. Now, Tim Conway and Harvey Korman, these two had a chemistry that was off the charts. They could make each other break character faster than you can say, "I'm so glad we had this time together." But their connection goes deeper than that. Both of them appeared on The Danny Kaye Show in the early 60s. That's right, they were honing their craft together long before they hit it big with Carol. But wait, there's more. Remember Vicki Lawrence? Carol Burnett basically discovered her when Vicki was just 18 years old. Talk about a big break. And get this, Vicky went on to star in her own show, Mama's Family, which was a spin-off of a recurring sketch on The Carol Burnett Show. That's like comedy inception, folks. Let's not forget The Flip Wilson Show, 1970-1974. Flip Wilson was a trailblazer, becoming the first Black American to host a successful variety show on network television. His characters like Geraldine Jones and Reverend Leroy were not just funny, they were cultural phenomena. "The devil made me do it" became a national catchphrase. And guess who appeared on his show? A young Richard Pryor, that's who. Now, let's hop across the pond for a second. In 1969, Monty Python's Flying Circus hit the BBC, and comedy would never be the same. This show was revolutionary, and its influence spread far and wide. John Cleese, Graham Chapman, Terry Jones, Michael Palin, Eric Idle, and Terry Gilliam created a surreal, intellectual brand of humor that was unlike anything else on TV. But here's the kicker, John Cleese had previously worked on The Frost Report with future Python members Graham Chapman and Eric Idle. But The Frost Report also featured Future, The Two Ronnies, stars Ronnie Barker and Ronnie Corbett. It's like 6 degrees of Python. Speaking of The Two Ronnies, this British sketch show starring Ronnie Barker and Ronnie Corbett ran from 1971 to 1987 and was known for its clever wordplay and memorable characters. Their Four Candles, Fork Handles sketch is considered one of the greatest comedy sketches of all time. And guess who wrote for them? A young David Renwick, who would go on to create the brilliant series, One Foot in the Grave. Now, let's talk spin-offs, because these shows didn't just entertain, they created whole new shows. We already mentioned Mama's Family, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. Remember The Andy Griffith Show? Well, it spun off into Gomer Pyle, USMC, starring Jim Nabors. And Gomer Pyle featured a young Rob Reiner, who would go on to appear in All in the Family, which itself spun off into The Jeffersons, and Maude. And Maude spun off into Good Times. It's like a comedy family tree. And let's not forget about Happy Days, which spun off into Laverne and Shirley, and Mork and Mindy. That's right, Robin Williams got his big break playing an alien on a spin-off of a show about the 1950s. Talk about a strange journey. But wait, there's more. We can't forget about animated shows. The Flintstones, 1960-1966, and The Jetsons, 1962-1963, weren't just sitcoms, they often included sketch-like humor within their narratives. And who created these shows? Hanna-Barbera, the same duo who gave us Tom and Jerry. That's right, even cartoon violence has its roots in sketch comedy. As we wrap up our journey through the golden age of sketch comedy, it's mind-blowing to see how interconnected it all is. From Your Show of Shows, to The Carol Burnett Show, from Monty Python to Laugh In, these shows and performers were all part of a comedy web that shaped what we laugh at today. They pushed boundaries, broke new ground, and most importantly, made us laugh until our sides hurt. And their influence? It's everywhere. You can see it in shows like Key and Peele, Inside Amy Schumer, and yes, even that show that airs live from New York on Saturday nights. This has been Mind-Blowing Connections. Remember, in the world of comedy, everyone's just a punchline away from each other. Stay tuned, stay laughing, and keep connecting those dots. And now, a word from our sponsor. Just kidding. That's a wrap, folks.